Hello, friends. I'm DJ Lance Rock, and today I am excited to talk to analog and modular synthesizer pioneer Suzanne Ciani.
Nice to meet you, Lance.
Thank you for taking the time to talk with us here. For people who don't know your story, that you were one of the early proponents of analog synthesis, but where Moog was on the East Coast and they were building their synthesizers, you were out on the West Coast with Don Buchla. And maybe you want to give a little background, or just maybe explain, or just tell how you got there.
Well, I was originally from the East Coast, so I grew up in the Boston area, but then I went out to graduate school in composition at UC Berkeley. And I had already had this idea of, this electronic music because I heard about it at MIT with a computer professor. But anyway, so I get out to UC California in Berkeley, and just by random happenstance, I meet somebody who lives next door to Don Buchla. And he said, "You have to meet this guy." So he invited me down. It was a big warehouse on the waterfront in Oakland. And he brought me down there, and that was the beginning of my epiphany of, the reality of electronic music.
Like this here?
Like this, this. And it's interesting, I think, because I talked to Mort Subotnick yesterday. I met Buchla in 1969, and he had already established his factory and his own musical instrument business. So I came in, I actually worked for him, and I was, proselytized by him directly that this was a performance instrument, not a studio instrument. So even Mort Subotnick thought of this thing as something to record. You make a sound, you record it, you make another sound, you record it. And I never thought of it that way. So Don was trying to make a new musical instrument that you could perform live. And that was my commitment to that instrument, to perform it.
And you did.
And I did, and I didn't realize it was impossible to do it. But I did it anyway.
Well, it wasn't impossible because you ended up doing it, but I'm sure it was an arduous process.
It was a challenge, yeah.
And when did you first, what was the first piece you composed on Buchla?
The first piece was actually the artist Harold Paris, who lived next door to Don Buchla. He was watching this evolution, and he said, he was a sculptor, and he had a show in Brussels, and he said, "Let's do a limited edition LP." And he gave me a list of things called Voices of Packaged Souls. And it was 13 concepts, the sound of an old man loving, the sound of a nose peeling, the sound of heat, the sound of cold. And that was my first album that was reissued recently by Finders Keepers. And I did that on a variety of things. I did it on the Buchla, I did it at Stanford on the computer, and I did some musique concrète. So it was a melange of approaches. But it was also, now in hindsight I look at it, the real birth for me of the concept of sound design.
That was like a sound installation.
It was poetically interpreting ideas with sound, the sound of heat. What's that?
I know,
hey.
That's great. So when that originally came out, wasn't it just like for the gallery patron, so it wasn't even a large run?
No, it's limited edition, and each album had an original Mylar drawing by the artist.
That's great.
So I don't even have a copy myself.
That's not
of
fair.
the original.
That's
I know.
Not fair at all.
I didn't.
You didn't have the hindsight, but now you're keeping everything here.
Right.
So, did you stay on the West Coast once you started performing with the Buchla, or did you end up traveling with it, or did you end up back in New York, or what was your journey from?
Well, the beginning of the journey involved actually procuring a Buchla of my own. So working for Don, I had access to his studio, but in order to get one, and they were quite expensive, I came upon the idea of doing commercial music. So I made money by doing commercials for Macy's. That was my first job, doing other assignments, and eventually that took me to LA, because one of my clients from San Francisco, MJB Coffee, said, you know, we have to record in LA. So I ended up in LA and worked with a lot of film composers there.
So you had access to this pool of people who were probably happy to utilize your innovative ideas.
Yeah, I mean, they all want something edgy, hot, new, you know, and I walk into town with this unknown, sophisticated, exotic thing, and so I was on everybody's list.
I can imagine.
them-
Can you name some of the other commercials you did? Because I know I was a little kid, but like in the 70s, you know, there was all kinds of really wild electronic music and advertising and commercials, and so like, you know, it caught my ear early on.
Okay. Yeah, that was probably the first forum for a lot of that sound. I don't. Okay. Well, in LA, I did, you know, film stuff and TV stuff. Like, I worked with Dominic Fontieri, and we did electronic soundtracks for TV. And then I went to New York to do a live Buchla concert for a sculptor in a gallery, an art gallery, and I fell in love with New York and never went back to LA. And that's where the heavy-duty commercial stuff started, because it wasn't long before I was starving again. And I said, how do I get, you know, New York is tough to be poor in. And I started to seek out commercials, and I did all the, you know, I wanted to start at the top. So I just looked up the biggest agencies with the best clients, and I knocked on their doors. So I did Coca-Cola,
Oh, great.
Atari, General Electric, ABC, Columbia Pictures, logos. I did a lot of logos because you could make a very unique identity, you know, with electronics for a corporate
WGBH in
brand.
Boston, that's a real distinctive one.
Yes.
They used to be my ringtone.
Oh yeah, you're from Boston.
No, I'm actually from St. Louis, but
okay.
I just grew up with that, and
Okay.
it's left an indelible impression.
That's what they're supposed to do.
And it did. But
Yeah.
did you release a lot of that stuff? I mean, it was just for the commercials. It never came out. You didn't release it under your own name, or just even release it for
It was a completely
commercial consumption.
Yeah, no, it was a completely anonymous art form. I mean, I was known in the industry for sure, but there was no interface with the public at large that had my name attached to it. So everybody knew my stuff, they heard it, but there was no...
No one came up and was like, "You're the Coca-Cola lady."
And actually, it wasn't until Andy had this idea, Andy at Finders Keepers.
Andy Rodel?
And I thought he was crazy. I thought, why would you want to release that stuff? And I found these old tapes in the archives and had them transferred. And, you know, he put that stuff out there, so it was his idea.
Well, Andy's a very wise man indeed.
Yeah.
In fact, I know they put out the 7-inch of some of the work you did for Atari.
Yeah.
Actually played some of that, and it just sounds amazing. And are you using a vocoder, or what are you doing to your voice on those?
I use a vocoder. I use the vocoder all the time. I work closely with the inventor of the vocoder, Harold Bode, B-O-D-E, and he lived in New Jersey. And one of the origins, you know, the incentives that I had to use my voice was that it gave me, you know, dynamic control over things. It was because synths in those days were not that expressive. You know, they didn't have velocity sensitivity or whatever. So the voice, I had a thing called a voice box that processed my voice, and I could use it as a controller. And what I was getting to is that the incentive was that they paid more on commercials if you used your voice. Because you were in the Screen Actors Guild as opposed to the Musicians Union.
Just by using voice.
Different
That makes
contract.
sense, yeah.
Different contract.
That is great.
Yeah.
So when did you decide, I'm doing all this great commercial work, and hey, I'm doing all right, but I want to make my own music and put it out there? You had been doing a few concerts here and there, I assume, but when did you first decide to put something out? I became aware of you you put out a record on Elon Mimaru's Finadar record.
Yes.
That was I lived in
That was
St.
my
Louis.
first album.
It was. See, I
Yeah.
didn't know that. I was working at a record store, and a lot of people were listening to that kind of music in St. Louis at the time. And so I just came, and I know Finders Keepers reissued that as well. But I did they?
Yes, they
They
did.
did? Okay.
Yeah, on LP.
I
yeah.
thought I knew somebody did, but I had that record, and I was actually starting to collect Finadar records. So it wasn't actually I was aware of you, but
That's cool that you did it through the label.
I did it through the label.
Ilhan was such a great guy.
I've read a lot of stuff about him. He sounded
Yeah.
amazing, and then
It was shocking because, I had gone all over Europe and all over the States to get a record deal, and I couldn't. And finally I went to Japan, and I got my first record deal for 7 waves. It was 6 waves, they had to have 7, so it became 7. And once I had that Japanese LP, it gave me a little bit of a booster to present something to American labels, but I was so used to disappointment that I didn't expect anything, but I kept going forward. And when Ilhan, I didn't even know him. He was a Turkish guy smoking Lucky Strikes, and with the big glasses. And I didn't know anything about his past, his history, that he was an electronic composer. And he said yes, that he would release it. And so Atlantic Finadar was my first American release. And I licensed it because I was smart. And then I licensed my second album to RCA, which then became BMG. But then my third album, unfortunately, I signed a more traditional record deal and don't own those masters now.
Yet. We'll
Yet.
get them back.
Right,
we'll get them back. But, just through happenstance. So that's actually one of my favorite albums on the label. And, also like the one with Freddie Hubbard that he did. They did a record together. And those are just very unique, interesting records. And it's like, I had never really heard anything like that. So I tried to follow you, but this was pre-internet, and, I didn't really know a lot about you until I started working at a record store in in Los Angeles, like
Was it like Tower? Or?
No, it was Amoeba, like in
Amoeba.
2001. So I'm like,
okay.
There's other stuff out here.
They had LPs there, okay.
But so I knew there was some other stuff, and I don't want to say this as a pejorative, but it's I listened to some of your other stuff, and it seemed to be a little more, the Hearts of Space, that show. It seemed to be a little more like, I don't want to say New Age. I don't want to say that, but it definitely seemed to be a little bit more like light and lilting than some of the, Seven Waves is definitely like, it's just got its own unique sound, and I had never heard anything like that. And I'm not saying that with the other albums, but it just seemed to be like, oh, now there's an audience that's can take this. And so I didn't know did you make a conscious effort to like...
Absolutely not.
You just did what you were doing.
I did.
Great.
New Age didn't come out until after my second album, and I never embraced that. The only thing I liked about it, and it was so controversial, that whole term, was that it gave a place in the record store, and I was grateful for that, because my first 2 albums, they didn't know where to put it. They'd see a girl on the cover and they'd put it in vocals. Everybody assumed if you were female, you were a singer. Then they might find out that it had electronics, so they would put it in the, odd bin of electronic things. Or they put it in jazz, or they put it in, there was no place for it. So you couldn't find it. You go into a record store. You worked in a record store. You must have been aware of that. And then, so the New Age category was, a negative and a positive. And I disagree that, I became airy-fairy or whatever, because I think my most relaxing album is 7 Waves. Then, in my second album, The Velocity of Love, had that piano for the first time. And that became a big hit, that one song that had the piano, The Velocity of Love. Then the third album, Neverland, did win a nomination in New Age. But I was never in that mindset. And what you'll see is that the evolution of those albums went gradually back to acoustics. So adding
And that's fine.
instruments.
And I was just asking, I certainly never accused you of be an airy fairy. I would never think that.
Oh, good.
I was just curious because I just remember when this market all of a sudden happened, and there's like, oh, George Winston, this, and then you also had people like Pitaro, and then, you know, Tamito had been doing stuff for a long time. All these artists got lumped into this category where all of them didn't fit, I felt. You know, and then when the stuff that was like, you know, Wyndham Hill, you know, like, it was just different.
Well, they were definitely going into that pocket. And that's why I couldn't be on Wyndham Hill, because it was a pocket that actually was defined by being acoustic. So at that time, there was no appetite. If you did something electronic, it was considered unnatural. It wasn't new aging. You know, it wasn't valid for.
It was weird because something happened with I guess something that when stuff that Vangelis was doing and like some of the soundtrack work or Tangerine Dream.
Yes.
But you were not, at least where I worked, you were not classified as, you were in avant-garde.
Oh.
There, so.
Well, you know, Vangelis plays on the Velocity of Love. He plays on three.
I did not know that.
Yeah, he doesn't play on the title song, but he plays on 3 of the cuts. Lay Down Beside Me is one that I particularly love. And he does a ribbon control on the CS80. And working with him was just, you know, amazing. He was, I mean, I could tell stories forever about that.
The camera's off, we'll tell stories, how about that?
Good idea. No, I mean,
absolutely.
good judgment. Okay.
So, did you have a desire, once those albums came out, did you have a desire to tour more, or did you want to actually do more live concerts? Because you had actually figured out a way to tame that beast early on when no one else could.
By that time, you know, my music had gone from pure Buchla. So my early performances were pure live Buchla. Now I'm in a different, you know, musical vocabulary. And I did want to tour because I always, you know, wrote my music with the idea of performing it.
Sure, absolutely.
But it was complicated. So I had Yamaha was supporting me at that time. And they said, well, what do you need to do these performances? And I said, well, I need like, you know, 6 DMP7s and 18, you know, SPX 90s. And, you know, I gave this enormous list thinking that they were going to like say, okay, we can give you a couple of those.
And give it to you.
They gave everything to me, and I had put in doubles because when you tour with electronics, you have to have backups. So I made this big thing called Conrack, short for concert rack, which had all these, you know, rack mount things, and I had a computer, and I played live keyboard, synth, you know, MIDI. It wasn't MIDI. I don't think we had MIDI then. Did we have MIDI? I don't think so. But anyway, the equipment was so enormous that when I did a European tour, I mean, we couldn't get on some of the planes, you know. Oh. It was you know, it was just too big stuff. So, but then I had a big tour planned, and it was a 25-city tour that I was so psyched for, and a week before, it was canceled.
So you never got to do that tour?
I never got to do that tour, and then, you know, I did a piano. I opened for Jean-Luc Ponty in a big U.S. tour, and then eventually I started touring in Spain and, you know, in other parts of the world.
Great.
Yeah.
With this, I don't want to say it's a resurgence, but just with the availability of some of your recordings that weren't available to the public, you know, general public, I'm sure, like, because of NAMM and Moogfest and stuff like that, you're actually seeing that there's an audience out there that really enjoys what you do and appreciates your place as a pioneer in electronic music.
Yes, and it's all very shocking to me, actually, because it's evolved like almost a change in identity that happened. You know, I didn't create this. I'm just caught up in the you know, flow. You know, I was never going to get another Buchla, and then all of a sudden I have one. I don't even know where it came from. You know, really. And then I keep getting invited to play it, so I keep playing it. You know, so yeah, there's something going on, and I'm along for the ride right now, and I'm not sure where it's going or how far I'm going with it.
Well, I just think it's because you were able to pioneer that early on, and maybe you didn't do it a lot. Now there's an audience there for you, so
Yes.
I think karmically, like, you're able to reap the rewards of what you started a while ago. Now that there's an audience that you can perform for.
Yes,
Sure,
and
we're
I
very happy to.
And I still do piano concerts. I need that balance. Technology is, let's just say, I love it. It's my, it's in my bones, and I have an automaticity with it that I love. But it's high risk all the time and stressful when you're doing solo, because the gear might not arrive in one piece. The airlines are unpredictable. I use big gear. And so there's always that level of, is this going to turn on,
I understand that. Well, I'm just glad that you are out here still performing for audiences.
Thank
and that
you.
we're all getting an opportunity to enjoy all of your work here. So,
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time.
We've been friends for a long time. We didn't
And
know
we
it.
just finally met.
We just
so.
met, yeah.
That does it. I'm DJ Lance Rock. This is Suzanne Ciani. She is awesome, and so are you. And we'll see you later. Bye.